The moment the captain's trembling voice echoed through the cabin, every passenger froze. Is there any fighter pilot on board?" His words cracked with urgency, the kind that stripped away all comfort. Mothers clutched their children tighter, businessmen who had scoffed at delays a moment ago suddenly sat upright, and flight attendants exchanged glances they weren't trained to hide. The air turned heavy, fragile, as though the plane itself was holding its breath. And yet, beneath all that tension, in the last row of economy class, a man slept, unkempt, forgotten, and dismissed by everyone who had noticed him earlier. A homeless man, curled into his seat as though the roar of engines was gentler than the streets he had once endured. Hours earlier, before the boarding gates had even closed, that same man had been the subject of stares and muffled ridicule. His clothes were frayed, his boots worn, and his coat smelled faintly of smoke and old rain. Passengers had recoiled as he shuffled through the aisle. One woman whispered too loudly, questioning why security had even allowed him aboard. A teenager laughed, holding his phone up as if to capture the humiliation. The man said nothing. He lowered himself into the last row by the window, his body heavy with fatigue, his silence misread as shame. None of them knew his name. None of them cared to ask. But behind those sunken eyes was a man who had once carried the weight of skies far darker than any storm a commercial jet might face. He had worn the helmet of a fighter pilot, not the shadow of a vagrant. He had soared where oxygen thinned and fear was thicker than blood. He had buried friends without funerals and returned from missions to silence rather than parades. Yet here now, he was seen as nothing more than a nuisance in a seat that smelled faintly of rust and despair. His name was Daniel Cole. Years ago, Daniel had been the pride of his squadron. His life had been a symphony of roaring engines, flashing skies, and unspoken brotherhood. He had flown above deserts where heat shimmered like broken glass, above oceans so wide the horizon seemed to vanish beneath his wings. His call sign had been whisper, because he spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. Men trusted him with their lives. Commanders trusted him with missions they dared not explain in detail. But wars do not end in the skies. They linger in the minds of those who fought them. And when Daniel returned home, medals in hand, he found the streets louder, the world faster, and his own silence unbearable. The accident had taken his family. A car crash on a rain-slick road, his wife and daughter gone in a blink. The medals meant nothing then. The cockpit felt empty. He stopped flying. He stopped speaking. And slowly, piece by piece, he stopped living. Without a home, without a reason, he drifted into the invisible army of the forgotten. Sleeping in shelters, eating when he could, walking endlessly, he became a shadow. And when he stepped onto that plane, it was not to travel, but simply because a stranger had handed him a ticket through a charity program for veterans. It was his first flight as a passenger in years. When turbulence hit, mild at first, most passengers brushed it aside. Planes shook. People adjusted their trays. But then the second jolt came, harder, sharper. Drinks spilled. A baby wailed. The captain's voice returned, measured but trembling beneath its calm. An electrical failure in one engine, unexpected and worsening. Backup systems engaged, but the storm outside was stronger than forecasted. The plane was being tossed like a toy. And then his words no passenger ever expects, shattered the thin veil of calm. Is there any fighter pilot on board? At once, whispers erupted, disbelieving, frantic. A pilot asking for help meant something was terribly wrong. Flight attendants hurried down the aisles, searching faces. People shrank back, shaking their heads. And there, still silent, Daniel stirred. His eyes opened, heavy but sharp, like a soldier who never truly sleeps. He looked around, saw the panic, felt the fear press against his chest like a weight he knew too well. He did not move at first. He simply sat, watching humanity reveal its truest face in moments of crisis. Some prayed, some cursed, some demanded answers. And then a young attendant, no older than the daughter he once lost, saw him. She paused hesitant, then asked softly, as though the words might sting, "Sir, have you ever flown before?" The passengers nearby sneered. "Him?" one man scoffed. "He can barely afford soap, and you want him to fly a plane?" Laughter, cruel and sharp, filled the row. Daniel said nothing. He stood. His frame was lean, his shoulders worn, but there was something unshakable in the way he rose. His silence drew more attention than any protest could. He walked past the staring faces, the whispers, the doubts. The aisle seemed longer than any runway, yet he did not falter. And when he reached the cockpit, the captain met his eyes, not the eyes of a vagrant, but the eyes of someone who had stared down storms most men could not imagine. The captain's hands trembled as he explained. The co-pilot was unconscious after a sudden impact. The systems were failing faster than expected. Visibility was near zero. They needed not just a pilot, but someone who had faced chaos at the edge of survival. Daniel listened without a word. He stepped forward, placed his hand on the worn yoke, and for the first time in years, felt a surge of belonging. Passengers sat in stunned silence as word spread. The homeless man was in the cockpit. The same man they had ridiculed, dismissed, and ignored was now the fragile thread between them and the earth thousands of feet below. Faces paled. The teenager lowered his phone. The woman who had whispered now clutched her cross. Silence blanketed the cabin like snow. Daniel's mind sharpened as muscle memory returned. The weight of the controls, the vibration of the engines, the tilt of the wings, it was all familiar, like a language he thought he had forgotten but had never truly lost. His breaths deepened. His hands steadied. He spoke only when necessary, giving clear, precise instructions, his voice low and unyielding. The captain watched in awe. This was not a man fumbling with borrowed skill. This was a pilot who had once danced with death at supersonic speeds. Minutes stretched into eternities. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating faces pressed against windows, pale and fearful. The plane descended through turbulence so fierce that even seasoned attendants prayed silently. And yet, through it all, Daniel remained calm. His silence was not emptiness. It was control, it was presence. It was the voice of a man who had nothing left to lose but everything to give. When the runway finally emerged through the storm, slick and short, Daniel's eyes narrowed. He knew the danger. He knew the odds. But he whispered a thought only to himself, a thought that echoed the words of his fallen comrades. You do not land for yourself. You land for those who still have somewhere to go. The wheels struck the ground hard, skidding, fighting against the rain. Passengers cried out, bracing for impact. But slowly, steadily, impossibly, the plane slowed. Metal groaned, brakes screamed, but then, stillness. The storm raged outside, yet inside, there was silence deeper than prayer. Daniel released the controls, his hands trembling now not from fear, but from memory. He sat back, eyes closed, as though the weight of years had lifted for a fleeting moment. When he emerged from the cockpit, passengers stared as if seeing him for the first time. Some wept openly. Others lowered their heads in shame. The businessman who had mocked him earlier whispered an apology he could not voice louder. The teenager deleted his video. The woman who had scoffed reached for his hand, but Daniel walked past without acknowledgement. His dignity was not for sale in their sudden reverence. At the terminal, authorities and reporters rushed to meet the plane, flooding with questions. But Daniel slipped quietly into the crowd, vanishing before anyone could grasp his name. He left behind no demand, no speech, only the memory of his unshakable silence. Yet those who had been on that flight carried with them something they could never forget, the image of a man they had dismissed as worthless, saving them all without asking for recognition. Later, among passengers, whispers of his words spread. For when asked why he had stepped forward, Daniel had spoken only once, and his words would live longer than any headline. A man's worth isn't measured by the clothes on his back, but by the battles he's already fought in silence. And so, in that truth, shame became respect, laughter became reverence, and silence became the loudest voice of all. This story, like the storm, leaves its mark on those who encounter it. For the world is full of silent heroes, carrying battles unseen, walking among us unnoticed. They ask for nothing, yet they give everything when the moment demands it. And so, dear listener, as you reflect on this story, remember, respect costs nothing, but its absence can cost everything. Where are you watching from tonight? Share your thoughts, share your heart, and let these stories remind us that even the quietest lives can echo louder than thunder. And if you believe the world should hear more of these voices, stay, listen, and join in honoring them. For sometimes, the ones we overlook are the very ones who will save us when we least expect it.